A busy festive period for Norwich City ends in another Carrow Road defeat. 6 points from 12 across the break from 4 games in 10 days. And I think you saw against Stoke this afternoon the full effects of the congested nature of that schedule. Welcome back. It's been a while to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt and Seaman to reflect on another disappointing afternoon at Carrow Road. And I think we'll start big picture, Pad, and then we'll zoom in maybe because we've got a lot to catch up on with the good people. It's I think post Preston was the last time we did a pod because of Christmas and New Year and the shortage between games, and it just wouldn't quite have worked with podcasts. In terms of the festive schedule from a Norwich City perspective, now we can sit down and reflect on it as 4 games, look at the points tally that they've got. How are you feeling sat here this evening?
So we're excluding Preston from that then, effectively, because that was 5 and 5 today. So that would be 4 points, wouldn't it, from 12? If you take, it was
6.
6.
Beat Charlton, beat QPR, yeah.
Okay, so six from 12. Sam made a good point on the walk up, but you split it between away and home within that. You know, we've come off the back of 2 losing games at home. They haven't scored a goal, so that evokes memories of the desperate first 7 or 8 games at Carrow Road. And it's not worry, that's too much, but it's a concern that we've regressed back to that again, albeit we're only talking the last 2 games, Watford and now Stoke, but nevertheless, not good signs. But then, conversely, QPR was pretty gritty. Charlton win, and it's just more, we've said this a few times, that for me, it's not so much hooked too much on festive points hauls, but really post-Southampton, I don't think they've played well enough. And Clement, I think, increasingly is touching on those themes in terms of chance creation, the fact that he's made it clear he needs creativity in this window, and they might be addressing that first chance they can get in pretty short order with a new signing. And again today, it was just clearly evident that in possession, on the ball, setting a tempo, setting a degree of control of a game, which half that game's been played in, and then on top of that, clearly then chance creation and then chance execution. For me, worryingly, post Southampton, I don't think any of the games subsequently, whether it was a win, whether it was a loss, whether it was a draw, I think you'd be hard pushed to say pre-Southampton and culminating in Southampton, some of the better stuff we'd seen on the ball under Clement in terms of, okay, there's a structure here now, there's an identity. You can see how they're trying to progress the ball from back to front. Players seem to understand their roles within that. It feels a little bit like that's gone away from them a touch, and it might just be, obviously, the nature of the schedule and how congested it is and not really able to do too much on the training pitches, I'm sure. And equally, probably a sense now that they do need to add some new blood in the January window. But for me, it's more the underlying concerns rather than, we're now here 2 hours out from another defeat at Carrow Road. I don't think we need to, as you said, we need to zoom out a touch. But by doing that, that is for me a little bit concerning now that Clement's initial uplift is just, maybe not so much in points, but if you look at the performances and how they're achieving these points, I think you'd have to say there are genuine concerns. But he knows that, and he is referencing that now in these last 2 or 3 media touch points when he's talking about he wants them to be better in terms of understanding what they need to do when they get in the final third, and then obviously then executing that. And that seems a little bit at odds with, you look at the goal return that McCarmer and now Sargent have put together. I think it's 16 league goals between them. But I think if you focused on just their predatory instincts inside the box, that would be masking structurally. I think there are still a few issues, and that's personnel-wise as well, which is why it would appear that they've looked at the top end of the pitch and are in the process of trying to address that. So, but if you bring it back to the festive period, I think that points haul isn't enough to and it's been proven. They started this period in the bottom 3, they now remain in the bottom 3. So it hasn't been enough to extricate themselves, irrespective of what the Portsmouth, Oxfords, Charltons, Blackburn to an extent have or haven't done. They, with a better points return, would have been outside the bottom 3. So measured in that, it doesn't feel like they've gone further forward as we'd hope they would have done through this festive period. And the fear is you just have to look beyond Walsall now in the FA Cup next weekend. That there's some very tough looking fixtures, home and away, and you're looking for a path through now. And in the shorter term, it looks quite difficult and quite challenging. But you could argue, Preston, Sheffield United, Southampton, they were all very tough fixtures, and more or less in all three of those games, Norwich prevailed. So you hope that Clement can almost regather what he was trying to do and what he felt like he'd harnessed and maybe has lost it a little bit, and that they can kick on again the other side of Walsall.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, Sam, isn't it? It's probably you probably walk out of the festive period, and I think Paddy summed it up nicely there with probably a confliction, really, because I think I would agree with Pad. I think there has been a dip in their performances. I think it's too strong to say it's been a regression. I think it's too strong to say it's been a step backwards, but they haven't quite been to the levels that they are. And I think that's always the worry, isn't it? When you make a managerial change, you have that initial burst and uplift where it's a new voice and everything's new and shiny and players want to prove themselves. But it's actually when things begin to settle down, you get a better idea of it. And I think probably what we've learned is probably what we could have said at the start of his tenure, which is this is a group that is in desperate need of an injection of quality, because he's very clearly a capable coach, but he's not a miracle worker.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the way that you have to look at it is whether they're better than they were when he came in. Maybe you're right that the kind of initial manager bounce has passed, and now they are looking slightly worse than they were, when they beat Southampton, or with some of those early performances that looked so encouraging. But I still think they look quite a lot better than they did under Liam Manning. So I think there's still evidence that actually under this management and with this current setup, they are long-term a better team and have better prospects than they did earlier on in the season. But for me, what's been spelt out again, and we keep saying this really, but it's just the fact that this group isn't really good enough for where they want to be. I think we've probably seen that it's good enough to stay in the division, but obviously it was built to try and compete for the playoffs and ultimately compete for promotion this season. So, yeah, I think mainly the negative signs we've seen in the last few games have been the signs that probably everyone has known from sort of the gaps in quality in the squad. But I think having now seen them a little while after Clement was appointed, it's been a couple of months now, or just under a couple of months. I still think I've seen enough to think they'll get enough results to get out of the bottom three and to stay in the division, which, even if it was on goal difference, people would have snapped your hand off for when Clement originally came in. So I think looking over these recent games and certainly the slight dip that's come with them, of course there is that slight negative association when you compare it with some of the performances prior to it. But overall, I would still say I'm feeling relatively positive about the direction of this group. I still think, actually, and this is a really good sign, the players who stood out to me as having improved are still largely looking like they have done. You look at Rory McConville, Kellen Fisher, Pelle Matson, some of the other individuals in that team. I would say that even if the collective isn't looking quite as good as a unit as they did against Southampton and Oxford at times, and other games, I still think those players look like they've improved, and like over the long term they're going to be much better under Clement. So yeah, probably not an amazing feeling, certainly coming out of today's game, but I would say long term they've shown the signs that actually this is a better head coach for this group of players, and the way that they're doing things now is much better than the way they were doing things earlier on in the season. Yeah,
agreed. And I think you guys have summed it up quite nicely in terms of they're in a better place generally, but I think there's probably still a need for more to come. Pelle Matson made this point after the game, Paddy. It's that ability to kind of put results together, put wins together. I don't think this football club has won back-to-back games in about 11 months or so. It's been a long period of time since they've been able to do that, and that is probably symptomatic of what they are, which is a young group, quite inconsistent, and we see it, don't we? They show that grit against QPR to get a result. I don't think they played well against Charlton, but a ball drops to Jovan Makama in the box and the form he's in and he scores. And then today you get a performance like today where it's just a complete no-show. That is, I guess, the prime example of where they find themselves in as a group at the moment.
And Clement knows that, because he's talked about what separates the really successful teams and clubs is that consistency, irrespective of the division. And there's a guy who's worked in 3 or 4 different countries, so he's well qualified to decode what it will take to, over time, moving beyond how this season pans out. But as a club, as an objective, as a project, that has to be baked in. Look at all the best seasons, recent times for Norwich. Those title-winning seasons, the promotion-winning seasons. Stating the obvious, but the teams who get themselves up and out are the consistent ones, who are not necessarily, will play teams off the park every week, but will dig something out when they have to. And I don't know why this has popped into my head, but I'm going back to a Liam Manningism about, remember we used to talk about we can't have sixes, we need, we can't, have this bandwidth, wasn't it?
His problem was there were too many threes and twos, I think, rather than sixes and sevens.
But I mean, in terms of that, he was on the money that you can't have this variation in it's 7 and 8 one week. It is, your words, Connor, 2 or 3 every other week.
I'm being generous, I think, with some of the performances.
Okay, -2 or 3, to go with the temperatures. But it's where these coaches are trying to pitch their collective group and their output is that, even because it's completely unrealistic, a 9-month season in the Championship, 46 games. It's a test, and you can see with my boys now, Coventry, the last month they've gone off a bit of a cliff, having looked like they're going to run away with a division. It is a tough, hard, exacting, unforgiving league, and I think that's what we saw in the lowest points of this season when you had a very young, very naive overall group of Norwich players. They were getting beaten up and bullied, metaphorically, too often, week in, week out. They'd be good at, even within game, not necessarily game to game, within game they would be able to compete for a period, and then in the clutch moments they'd fall the wrong side. And that today was very similar. That was a game that if it had finished 0-0, you probably, like Watford 2 or 3 games ago, then you'd have probably said, okay, well, haven't really done enough to win it, but they ground something out and they move on and they roll on. But they've just fallen the wrong side again, and maybe that's just a reminder that the makeup of the resource he's working with is still probably too much on the inexperienced quota. I think in terms of the Matson and McLean axis today for me was off. But you have to cut them some slack because they have gone to the well game after game under Clement. That's the one area the team hasn't rotated, and they looked a bit weary today, and that was symptomatic of the team performance as a whole. But that comes back to the resource and the available resource. Obviously, with Mirko Topic in that area of the pitch out for the season, Jacob Wright being needed further forward, they look very light in that area. And as good as Clement has been at sort of patch quilt working his way around it, maybe it's got to the point where they just need help. He needs help. He needs reinforcements in key areas of the team, and then hopefully all the good elements that we have seen, they come to the fore again. But it just feels at the moment that not in terms of headcount, because they have plenty of bodies, but maybe just in terms of the quality drop off. If you were to lose a McLean or a Matson at your centre midfield, or Sargent at the top end of the pitch, that drop is too big. And I think we felt that with Liam Manning's team as well. If the key players were unavailable, the drop was too fast. And for me, that also typified the Hannes Torrup era as well. And that maybe comes back round to recruitment and Ben Napper's work in successive windows to try and recalibrate a squad which is deeper than just an 11 and a few other subs. And unfortunately Clement has picked up the reins mid-season, and he's trying to deal with that while also dealing with the fitness dimension, which we don't need to go too much into, but it's a given that I said to you, turn to you in the second half today, is it that because he's had to almost mid-season try and reset the counter in terms of the fitness levels, has that caught up with them a little bit? Because they looked, again, running on empty for me today, and maybe you could say that in the last 2 or 3 games. So has that almost Colney block of work caught out a few now as well? Because in an ideal world, he's not having to try and reset the counter with the fitness levels of the group, which he has said more than once were nowhere near where he wanted them to be. They're still nowhere near where he wants them to be, but they're better than 5 or 6 weeks ago. So maybe it's actually a testament. The results they did pick up in this up to this period are a testament to him and his impact, and that he was able to navigate that. But that maybe only gets you so far along the path, and now it's about January, and also getting a player like maybe Papa Jallo back as well, because I think he could unlock something in the final third clearly. And if they get those elements in the next few weeks, then let's see what Clement can do with almost the next part of this project under him.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice way to put it. I mean, the bar was so. I mean, it was probably a League One bar. Let's be honest, where Norwich City were performing. He has dragged that up. He has brought performances up. He's made them, to Sam's point, more competitive. He's had to do that despite dealing with a lot of injury issues and a lot of fitness concerns. But it's probably now, as Paddy says, Sam, that next step. He's got them kind of to a level where they're in games, they're competitive, they are able to go toe-to-toe with teams. And we saw that today. I thought the first 45 minutes was very even, but dull, but even. And then it's just that added bit of quality, that extra sprinkle of something, be it final third, be it creativity, be it depth, all of those things that probably he is lacking. And sadly, those elements, by and large, you can coach, obviously, patterns and attacking combinations and stuff, but the creative element is almost quite innate within players, isn't it? If they kind of don't have it at this stage, they're not going to have it. And it just feels like Norwich still lack that kind of X factor to take them from competitive to being where maybe Watford and Stoke have been in these games, where they've just had that difference and that bit of quality to win it. Sorba Thomas today, probably Irukunda for Watford.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the encouraging part of that is that Clement has recognised it. Whereas I think under Manning, at times when they lost games by fine margins, or there wasn't that quality, or you couldn't see the patterns of play, Manning liked to just put it down to behaviours. And
there's a lot of people that have just shuddered as you've said that.
I know. I shuddered a little bit as I said it, I think. But you know, the kind of intangibles and these sorts of things. And even when you asked him about tactics and tried to prompt him into explaining what the problems were, he always just came back to those things anyway.
I'd say we all talk too much about tactics, but never really.
He never
really
talked about tactics. I think, maybe in his mind we talked too much about tactics. But I'm glad we didn't see a similar thing with Clement, because it would be easy to say, you know, the margins are fine. It's just about mentality. It's just about a little bit of luck and you know, players being in the right places at the right times. But the fact that Clement recognises there's actually a problem that he can work on and that he can try to improve, as you said, it's not everything, but you can coach a team to move better in the final third and to have better kind of understanding of each other. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Not only the quality of players that they've got in the final third, but also the type of player they've got, the profiles and how they fit into his formation. I think you can see clearly from the wingers. They've probably got Jallo in that position. Maybe Jurasek fits there in, you know, with work and on a good day. But Jovan Makama has had to play out wide quite a lot. I don't think he's really a Clement winger. Oscar Schwartau, I don't think is a Clement winger either. That number 10 position, again, Jacob Wright, I think at the start it looked like quite a clever idea, but as time's gone on, we've probably learned that he isn't the solution as a sort of number 10, and maybe that's not the best place for him either. So I think they will try to address all of those things in the transfer market, and you know, I don't know when we're planning to come onto it, but it kind of leads into Ali Ahmed and kind of his transfer from obviously Vancouver Whitecaps. Looks like exactly the sort of player who they want to bring in, and very much a Clement winger. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But you know, you kind of speak to people at the club, it sounds like they are still looking at that number 10 position. Maybe another winger will come in as well, and I think that's encouraging. Ultimately, the recruitment record is obviously very mixed, so it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a silver bullet and it is going to solve all of those problems. But the good news is that in those positions where I think they have needed a bit more quality, the reinforcements should be coming. And I hope personally that they go for the sorts of players who just have a bit more like sort of magic about them. It's a bit cliche, but you know, that kind of thing that players like Wes Hoolahan or Emi Buendia or James Maddison have, where they can see a pass and they can do something that you're not expecting them to do. Because I think they've been recruiting a lot of kind of athletes and a lot of players who, you know, can do conventional things very well, look physically good, are reasonably solid. But I think they've lacked that spark now for a couple of years. So it looks like they're going to head into the market, and I hope for their sake that they're looking at those actually more creative players rather than just kind of athletes who have happened to play in those positions for most of their careers.
Yeah, safe is kind of the word that jumps to me, but I don't know if that's the right word I would use in terms of some of the players that they've recruited. And I think sometimes this, and I don't want to go back to making this a data debate, but I think it is a common criticism of clubs that use data, that you can end up almost looking for a perfect player or players that maybe have certain things. Because if you're let's use Wes Hoolahan as an example. If he made 5 passes, it would be the one that was successful that would often lead to the goal. So that sometimes
his running stats would have been terrible as well.
Correct. Yeah. Well, less so towards the end of his career. Where I think he's running 5Ks in stupid times now. But yeah, absolutely. And we saw that again today, Paddy, didn't we? In terms of that creativity, that edge that Norwich have. It just wasn't there. I think Sargent had a very limited amount of touches. Again, we spoke a lot about that under Liam Manning. There was a Makama header, obviously the goal that was ruled out for offside correctly. They didn't create too much really today, and that again has been a theme probably of this festive period. The games have been low margin. Clement kind of pushed back when I said, well, is that by design? And he didn't really feel like it was. So that lends you to think it's a quality point, because if you look at the back line, it's definitely shored that up. They are conceding fewer goals. They are looking more solid. But it means that goals have a bigger impact at both ends if you can grab them, and I think we are seeing a little bit of that at the moment with their games.
Well, yeah, I mean, just narrow into Watford and now Stoke. 180 minutes of football at Carrow Road, and they haven't scored, and I don't think they've mustered too much in terms. I think it was that the only shot on target? The header from Makama. When I checked late in the second half, that was still only one recorded shot.
Sam will have a look for us while he's speaking.
But whether it was one or two, I mean, it's a pretty thin sample, and that extrapolate that figure alone, that tells you they haven't created anything near enough, certainly at home. And that is, of course, concern, because two shots, yeah. So, that's nowhere near good enough. That's not going to get the job done. However more resolute you are as a defence, and unfortunately, defensively, that let them down in the 2 key moments today. You can analyse the errors individually and the lack of concentration, maybe a bit of fatigue of mind as much as body. But and the fear is obviously, when you aren't as robust defensively and you do concede, then this team at the moment, they don't look like they can go up the other end of the pitch and really pin teams back. And that, for me, rolls back round again to that point that I think post Southampton, there has been a drop-off in that aspect of Clement's template. And there's probably a lot of factors for that, and we've discussed a lot of them in this podcast already. But to take Sam's point and your point, I thought was a good one as well, that today and Watford, those 2 games where Norwich couldn't muster a goal, those teams have had these game-changing, pacey, wide options, direct, make things happen, commit players, open up space for others, and that's proved decisive. And that does, I think, elevate a solid, well-coached Championship team, which probably was where Norwich are, to something a bit better and a bit more optimistically upward in terms of their ambitions. And it's very clear that Clement has identified that. By the way, he was talking up the return of Jallo as a new signing and a profile he can't wait to work with. And B, as we sit here, not quite done, but very close to being Ali Ahmed coming through. And I think there probably will be another wide player by the end of the window. So that very much tells you effectively 3 new wide additions for Clement to work with, that he feels that is an area of weakness in this group. And it's stating the obvious, because look on the right-hand side, Jurasek, Amankwa Forson, Tony Springett, Oscar Swartel on the left-hand side. They're not out-and-out wide players, not in that template that we're talking about, with the pace to stretch defenders, commit players, create something just off the cuff, just by their trickery and their pace and their balance and their movement. Norwich don't have that profile of player, certainly not at the disposal of Clement thus far, and I think that is an area where they, A, have identified, and B, are now seeking to address. And also, I think, it's not to be underestimated. You touched on it there. Sargent, the fewest amount of touches, probably for quite a number of games, probably back to the Manning era. Him and Makama, as good as they are at scoring goals, they need better service. They need more sustainable service than they have got, because really, you can go and analyse a lot of their goals in this recent spell. they've come out of nothing really, or balls that have broken in the box, and some of those Makama strikes. It isn't as a result for me of Norwich carving teams open and manoeuvring teams out of position to then create the spaces for those players to score goals. All of that we have talked about here, but all of that Clement's well aware of, and let's see if Ahmed's the first one and Jallo comes into the mix. Let's see if there's any other additions, and then more importantly, what does Clement do with them? How do they add that dimension that feels to be lacking in their attacking template?
I think you have to go back to Watford at Vicarage Road, which was start of December, to find another goal scorer for Norwich City that wasn't Josh Sargent or Jovan Makama, and that was Oscar Schwartau, who's got 2. If you are an opposition manager at the moment preparing to face Norwich, it is stop Sargent, stop Makama, and you find a way of stopping Norwich from at least winning the game. And I think and again, this is something that I've kind of felt for a few weeks and has not really been relevant to kind of bring up, but even if you boil it down to like the quality of their set pieces, I think over now a prolonged period have been really, really poor. Yeah. And for a team that is down there, and when your games are low margin, you need to utilise those elements a lot better than what Norwich are doing. So that's proving problematic. And then, I just don't think they engineer enough opportunities in open play either, which is a problem. And again, it's hard, isn't it, Sam? Because you don't really want to lay into these players who, like Oscar Schwartau, isn't for me a wide player. I think he will end up as a number 10 in a more central position. Jacob Wright, who's obviously I know he played there a bit for Manchester City's youth team, but very different in the Championship and in the cut and thrust of that. When you kind of been developing as a number 6 before that, to be pushed up the pitch is quite hard. And then the rights, obviously, there's been some good bits from Jurasek. I thought we saw some good bits today in the first half, but he fades in games. Fitness level isn't quite there. All the stuff that Clement has spoken about, and then Paddy has kind of spoke about. Well, Forson can't stay fit at the moment, but even he kind of has had fleeting moments where he's looked effective. Tony Springett has come back in, and there's been lots of endeavour and energy without maybe that end product as well. So there's a lot of youth in that kind of attacking line, Sam. And I guess this is where it comes on to Ali Ahmed, who is slightly different. He's 25. He's in a different. He's still young because I'm 25, so I hope that is still young. But he's still in a portion of his career where his better years are to come, you would think, but just in a different stage where he's got more minutes. He's an international. He's played in some high-level environments, been quite successful with Vancouver over what has been a rise for them in the MLS over the last couple of years. Just feels like a different pedigree, and obviously we need to see him in the Championship and how it looks, but that at least feels like a step towards some of the stuff that we've spoken about. And as we said, the positive thing is we're not sort of sat here uncovering fresh issues. These are issues that Philippe Clement has referenced as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the fact they've gone into the market for somebody is a positive sign. I don't really want to do like a manager press conference thing and say I don't like to speak about this certain topic or whatever, but I do think it's always hard to judge players based on other leagues. I think you can, I'm not really saying anything new, but you can kind of make any player look good or bad depending on which clips you select and which bits you look at. I think his stats have been good, and I do think stats are, certainly the frontline stats are important for kind of judging wingers and stuff, because I think they've had a few of those players you mentioned, to be fair, have put in some decent performances and things like that, but they need goals from other areas, and Clement actually referenced that when he was speaking to you at the pre-match press conference. And they also need players who can offer those tangible moments rather than like a Jurasek today, for example, where you're looking at it saying he's made some positive contributions, he looks better and things like that, but it doesn't actually really mean anything when you're trying to stay in the Championship unless they can contribute kind of goals and assists and big moments. So I think the fact he's done that for Vancouver is a positive step, but ultimately anyone who's watched the MLS in any sort of way over the last few years knows it's a completely different league to the Championship. You look at some of the other players they've got who have looked excellent in other leagues, and it's taken them some time to adapt. I think especially as somebody coming in January, it will be hard, even though he is a bit more in his prime than some of those other players they've signed, for him to adapt and become a key player in sort of the next couple of months. Especially in that sort of position where it's, it tends to take players a little bit of time. But he clearly is somebody who's closer to his prime than the sort of 20, 21-year-olds they've signed. I know it's pretty highly rated by a lot of clubs sort of at this level and things. So, Yeah, I think it's a positive sign, and clearly a sign that they want somebody who can deliver now, really, because you look at the makeup of that squad. There are some players in there who are kind of blossoming now under Clement, still have some way to go and have already been at the club for sort of 18 months. So that shows you how long it can take sometimes when you take this kind of strategy. And I do think it's a good one in the long term to try and sign young players and to to look to the future, to give yourself a revenue source and players who are going to deliver it for you in the long term. But what they've done really well at other times, what they did really well in the Farker era, for example, is sign players who aren't necessarily Ashley Barnes or Danny Bart, who are 34, 35, and to be honest, a little bit over the hill, but signing kind of players in their prime and in their late 20s and things like that. I think a 25-year-old it's a good age, really, for them to be. That's right. 26 soon, though, is it? So, yeah. But no, I think it's the right profile for where they are at the moment. But he still has probably a couple of years to actually get used to the Championship before he then starts to kind of get a little bit worse in his position. So, I think it's a positive sign. But again, I always find it hard to judge players based on other leagues, particularly the MLS, which I actually find kind of bizarre whenever I watch it. It looks completely different to the Championship. So, but experts who know more about how these leagues translate to each other much better than I do have decided that he's a good player and would fit in well at Norwich. So, I think you have to be optimistic about it, but I think we have to wait until he's in a Norwich shirt to really make a decision.
If Norwich fans have learned anything from the summer, it should be, in any window really, it's probably just not to go in with 2 feet all the time on these players. Let's actually see what he looks like first. It hasn't quite been confirmed at the time of us recording, which is about 8:05 on Sunday evening. But I suspect by the time this podcast is live, it will be, or it's completely gone wrong and it's not happening and whatnot. In which case, all of this stuff is pretty irrelevant. But he was at Carrow Road today, and I think Philippe Clement got to about as close as he was willing to get to confirm that they were close to confirmation on that one. Part 2 coming up. We are going to talk about the shenanigans with the Carrow Road pitch this afternoon. Mateus Chriskoren as well, and we'll look ahead to what feels like quite a daunting run of fixtures after that FA Cup clash against Walsall. See you in a second. Welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, reflecting on a 2-0 defeat for the Canaries at Carrow Road to end their festive period. And Paddy, I think it was an odd match day in that I think when you think about Carrow Road generally in terms of weather and games being called off at this time of year, we typically think of Carrow Road as being quite reliable. I certainly can't remember the last time a game at Carrow Road got called off for weather. I don't really remember a situation where that's happened in my lifetime. I'm sure it probably has at some stage, but obviously undersoil heating and stuff has protected them previously. That felt today probably as close as we've got to a game at Carrow Road being called off for a playing surface, and just felt very odd, didn't it, the way it kind of all unfolded?
Well, I'm going to back that straight back to you because you had a front row seat, Connor, so you're better qualified than me to discuss it. But what I would just say before I do that is... I
should have put the ice back on, shouldn't I? It's basically...
No, I wasn't going to say... I was just going to say who comes to town next weekend. It's Walsall, and when you talk pitches and weather and call-offs, it just goes back to the Lambert era with the burners on the pitch at that League One title charging season. But yeah, no, like you, I don't recall any episodes where it was a game was in the balance and then it went the other way. But as in it would be called off prior to match day. So but I was blissfully unaware. But you being a professional, get there very early, and I'm going to let you take it from there. What happened on arrival at Carrow Road?
Yeah, so I was walking into Carrow Road, it would have been just after 12, and saw kind of the social media chatter around the pitch and the game in general and where things were at, and almost in my head kind of thought, well, that can't be there. I was expecting to walk outside and see the luscious green turf and to see everything okay, and it all have to have been a little bit of a kind of social media frenzy. But I think actually stepping out, and I went out with our photographer today, Dan Hanbury, to have a look at it, and his first reaction was, I need to get a picture of this, which if a photographer says that, I think paints some sort of picture about the state of the pitch. I mean, they had these, like the lamps they have to kind of protect the grass, that was on there, I guess, to try and generate some heat. Pete, the kit man, bless him, was out there with a shovel. Stewards were out there with shovels, and it was not in a great way. I think that's fair to say. There was a top layer of ice that was still on the pitch from yesterday. I then went back inside, then went back out, and that's when sort of the proper shoveling was still happening, and also all of the stuff had been taken off the pitch. And again, there were stewards, and they've been out there for a period of time, so I kind of offered to step in. And when I did that and walked on the pitch, I think what you could feel is the pitch itself, certainly the area that I was on, which was the bit between the City stand and kind of the middle of the half that Norwich were attacking. So the Barclay end, basically. So what they were attacking that in the first half was okay. It was soft on the foot, but there were kind of the best described like pellets of ice is what I can describe them as, where I think they'd essentially been broken up and they were laying all over the pitch and had to obviously be removed by shovels. So yeah, even that aspect was odd. The fact, it wasn't just me. There were the other members of the media. Mike, I'll call him out, who works for Mike Sewell. He does some good stuff for TalkSport, and I think Radio Norfolk as well at points was out there. Anthony Richards, the finance director, was out there. James Hill, the legal guy. Some of the stewards, the grounds people. There was loads of people out there trying to clear the pitch, and this was probably just after 1 o'clock. So that gives you an indication, I think, of just how tight it was. And clearly, I think it was obvious that Philippe Clement wasn't happy with that surface. And this has maybe been a festive period where we've spoken far too much about the conditions of pitches, because compared to Loftus Road, it was like a Wembley surface, Paddy. But for a Carrow Road pitch, I think it's fair to say it left a lot to be desired.
Well, that'll teach us, won't it, to be disparaging towards other Championship teams' pitches, because for all your efforts and the efforts of everybody else, that it wasn't still a great service. And then when the temperature for me dropped second half, you could feel it. You could almost feel that the pitch was getting very difficult.
Heavy.
Yeah, and bottom line is, I don't think Clement was impressed at all. He kept his counsel in the post-match. He was asked by a colleague, and quite rightly said, well, he's not a pitch expert, but I think, privately, I think there'll be some serious dialogue goes on inside that football club to avoid a repeat of that, because fundamentally, if you're being given a shovel and told to get on the pitch, no slight on you, but something has gone wrong in the processes.
Particularly when you think generally about how precious they are about people going onto the pitch.
A championship game of football shouldn't rely on.
And I mean, if you look at my boots, they're not ideal, really.
No, you'd have known. You'd have brought your waders or something like that.
Exactly.
But, so clearly there is something they will have to reflect on as a club, and the relevant departments within the football club to ensure there's no repeat.
But one thing we can say, just jump in, because I think there's been lots of questions about this. The undersaw heating, we believe, was on. When it was put on is maybe for a different debate, but
yeah.
That
if it
was
was,
the case.
I mean, if it wasn't, you talked in your dissection that it was on the surface. Well, that would have been in the ground itself.
Yeah,
it would have been
which it wasn't.
hard.
It wasn't.
No.
The bit that I was on wasn't frozen.
No, and I think you'd have heard by now if there'd have been some sort of fault in terms of the electrics, maybe with the heating equipment that goes into heating the pitch. So I don't think it felt to me, and you could see actually around the perimeter in the game itself, the volume of snow that had been cleared off the pitch. So it was obviously, the issue was the top surface, as it were, and the snow that was lying on there. But anybody who's been in Norfolk or Norwich specifically in the last 24 hours has seen the volume of snow we've had. So it does seem quite surprising that
it was forecast as well.
Exactly, that the measures were not taken and contingencies put in place to avoid, as I say, basically co-opting anybody who was available at that time to get onto the pitch and try and clear what needed to be cleared. So, but yeah, there's no doubt. And to be fair, although Clement, I don't think will be too impressed by that whole episode, he wasn't offering that up as this is the reason we've lost this game. He said clearly it's a factor, as was maybe a fifth game in 15 days, but how big those factors were, he would have to go and sit and reflect, and maybe in the days ahead. But it doesn't help. It doesn't help what Norwich are trying to do. And as we saw, Kenny McLean said it, after the game at QPR, they had to effectively tailor how they played that game in terms of the way they moved the ball forward and up the pitch and how they defended as well, I'm sure, that day. So maybe not to the same degree today, but it wasn't conducive to getting the ball down and trying to unlock what we've discussed already here, which is a little bit of a fitful issue now in terms of final third creativity. But I certainly wouldn't be running away with the idea that the pitch has hampered Norwich to the point where they were putting in that performance today. I think there's far more other priority factors as to why that performance today wasn't really on the money. So, but it doesn't help, and it's a talking point. We've spent 5 minutes now discussing something which really seemingly for a Championship football club of Norwich's standard and stature does seem very strange. So, yeah, we'll see the repercussions of that. But I'll be surprised if you need to get your shovel out in the next sort of period. That's for sure.
Yeah, let's hope not. I think if I knew what was to come, as I said earlier, I'd have put that ice back on the pitch and done my utmost to claim that it was frozen as the referee was walking round. But yeah, alas not. But yeah, and I think it generally was a bit of a surprise because we associate that pitch with being so good for a lot of the campaign, even in the Championship when there's so many games. And compared to Loftus Road, for example, Carrow Road is most weeks incredible as a playing surface, and players and coaches say that repeatedly. So I think that kind of fed into the surprise of it. But yeah, like there's always two teams that have to deal with the same thing. I think from Norwich's frustration will be that much like a kind of home cricket surface, you can tailor it to what you want it to be, and it wasn't there today. And that's not why they lost the game, but it's maybe a factor in a wider performance, even if it was just a very minute one, and clearly Philippe Clement wouldn't offer that up. Sam, I think just to kind of touch upon today generally, is it a concern, and we've kind of spoken around this a little bit, that in those games that have been low margin, particularly the last two at Carrow Road, that they've almost found a way again to lose them? Because again, and I guess the wider opportunity that they had today with Oxford not playing, Portsmouth not playing, to move out of the bottom three. They've been in there since October. It's been a long period, a long slog for everyone. The psychological aspect of that is a huge blow as well, particularly now with those teams with games in hand around them.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was so concerned about the low margin stuff. I do think Watford and today have obviously been pretty bad examples of that. But even though they played well against Southampton, you could say that was a pretty tight game and they ended up winning that one. Charlton, yeah, I thought they were the better side, but again, not loads in it, and they ended up finding the odd goal in that one. I think they've done okay in that sense under Clement, so I wouldn't be particularly worried about that. I do think psychologically not getting out of the bottom three could end up being a problem, and I'm sure Clement will obviously do everything he can to stop that happening, but especially with Portsmouth and Oxford not playing, it did feel like a really, really big opportunity. All they had to do was get a point at home when they've only lost one game at Carrow Road under Philippe Clement against a team with a lot of injuries. When they had a bit of momentum from that QPR win, it did feel like a lot of things were going their way in terms of finally getting out of that bottom three. So it does feel like a big wasted opportunity. I also think the fact that they've now got 2 weeks to stew on it and to think about their league position with the FA Cup game coming up next, I don't think that really helps, and I think the fans could have done with that boost, because even though there are obviously the caveats that Portsmouth and Oxford could play their games in hand and they could, Norwich could end up back in there, all the headlines and the talking points would have been Norwich are finally out of the relegation zone for the first time under Philippe Clement, for the first time since whatever point they entered it early on in the season. So I think it would have been a big statement, and it would have meant, much like we talk about going into sort of international breaks, the importance of getting a good result. I think the fact they've now got 2 weeks until the next league game, I think it would have been really nice for them to have been able to say that they were out of the relegation zone. I think before they can kind of kick on, that's almost a psychological barrier they need to hurdle, really. So, yeah, I do think that's more of a factor, although on the kind of lower margin thing, yes, they have struggled with that in the last two Carrow Road games, but I think overall they've won a few games in that scenario under Clement, so I wouldn't worry particularly about that. but the games are running out in terms of that relegation prospect. I don't personally think they will get relegated, but the longer they leave that, the more panic starts to set in, even if people are happy with the performances and kind of the momentum. So yeah, I think they need to do that as quickly as possible, and I thought today was a massive opportunity that they've missed.
Yeah, and it just gives that sense to fans, doesn't it, that there's actually some tangible benefit to kind of what we're seeing in terms of performances and results that we spoke about earlier. Paddy, before we begin to look ahead, I wanted to speak a little bit about Matthias Christgården, who we saw again for very limited amount of minutes. I think prior to this game, and I put this to Philippe Clement pre-game, it was 84 minutes that he's played under him, and I think about 60 of those came away at Birmingham in that opening game in charge. What do you make of that situation? Because he was a player that there was a lot of fanfare around, in particular in signing, in terms of the coup that they'd pulled off, the clubs that they'd beaten, the transfer fee that they'd paid, the release clause that they'd uncovered. We saw and we're beginning to see from him, I think he scored kind of 3 on the spin, didn't he? 3 or 4 in the spin in that period against Leicester, against Birmingham. Sheffield Wednesday he scored as well in that draw. Felt like we were beginning to see some really good stuff from him, and now we've seen very little. Clearly there's been some fitness stuff to manage here, but yeah, what's kind of your thoughts on that situation?
We can only ever really gauge it from Clement's public utterances and his underuse, effectively, of Christgården, as you say, in terms of the pure minutes over these 8-9 games or whatever it is of the Clement era. And I go back to the Birmingham one, really, when he starts him with effectively Sargent in a 2 or one slightly withdrawn, and after that result, probably the following week, he made it quite clear he didn't think the two could play together. Okay, well, if that's the case, there's only one of those going to be playing if they're both available, and that's Josh Sargent. So recruited as a central striking option, that was effectively his primary career at Brombu, if you look at his goal record. So that's a problem straight away, because the new head coach feels Sargent's the man, and this bringing it up to date when you asked him his response, very illuminating in the sense of Jovan Makama's gone past him. He turned to him when Sargent was unavailable, and Makama, and we've had this discussion, about Jovan, that maybe his all-round game leaves more to be added to, inevitably, a young player coming out of League Two, and he's raw in certain areas of his game. But what you cannot deny is he has had a major impact. He has decided a lot of games in this mini period without Sargent through the concussive episode. So if you're Christgården, you've got to kind of suck that one up, because he's turned to Makama, and Makama has delivered, purely based in terms of goals and impact. So it's hard. He's in a bit of a backs to the wall situation, because he's only getting these limited amounts of minutes. It's tough for him to actually make an impact, really. And again today, he gets thrown on 2-0 down, game's done, a couple of minutes to go. You would think he would be ripe for a start against Walsall in the FA Cup, as probably Jakov Medic. But the answer to that question I put to Philippe post match was almost tipped towards no. I'm not. There won't be mass wholesale changes. I want to build a winning culture, and whether it's the league or the FA Cup, I want to win that game, and I want us to do that, possibly with players that he has used more often than not. So it would be a surprise still if Christgården doesn't start that game. And if he doesn't, you can take that as another signal. If we're going to League Two levels of opponent at Carrow Road, and Matthias Christgården is still not deemed to be a starting option for Philippe Clement, then, the reality is he wasn't bought by Philippe Clement. Philippe Clement had no say in his arrival. He predates Philippe Clement, and different head coaches come in and have different views on players, and you maybe seen that with McConville. There's in a reverse way of how there's a player who wasn't getting a look in under Torup, wasn't really getting a look in under Manning. Now, post Birmingham, that first game, he started every single game, and even in these last 2 games, he's not in the changing room with McConville. It's Darling out at QPR, it's Jose Kudaiber in. Those 2 switch back again today, but the one constant is Rory McConville. So, unfortunately for Matthias, he's now got to impress a head coach who maybe the jury is out a little bit, and I'm sure everything he's said publicly, he will have said privately. It's a surprise to me, because Christgården's, by the nature of his game, he is that. I think Liam Manning coined the term, he's like a pest. He never gives defenders a moment's peace, and it's clear that Clement wants his players to be very good in terms of leading that press. Sargent is good at that, but you would think he might actually suit the manager's eye because of his all-round game, but evidently not, and that's based on the lack of minutes he's had. So how that changes, It's hard to see because, if Sargent is here beyond January, McCarmer is here beyond January, they look like the central striking options. So where does that leave Chris Gordon? He's kind of teased that he could maybe play in a slightly different role, but he wasn't recruited to play a slightly different role for me. And now, not through the door yet, but they're trying to add one wide player and maybe another one by the end of the window, maybe a number 10. That's populating those other areas where you would think Chris Gordon, if he's not going to play as a central striker, he could play in some of these other areas. I think it's a real conundrum. Now, the reality is, between now and the end of the season, will McCarmer be fit and available for all these games? No. So he may get opportunities, but at this very moment in time, it looks like he's third choice. And for a player brought in with that fanfare, the headline summer signing, nobody would have envisaged that. But a bit like Jurasek, a bit like McConville, it's for Matthias Chris Gordon now to try and change Philippe Clement's mind, and he can only do that maybe by the training minutes, and when and if he does get an opportunity, he has to deliver on the pitch, and it's difficult for him at the minute because you wouldn't say he's getting a huge sample of minutes to actually impress, but those are the cards. Jakov Medic, very similar case study, a summer signing, who's probably even further back in terms of Clement's thinking now. He's not even making squads. I mean, he was on the bench today, but prior to that, he sat in the stand at QPR. So, these players who were recruited as part of a turn of the wheel and maybe finding in their first 6, 7, 8 months in England, it's definitely not gone to plan. We've not even talked about Chris Gordon, unfortunately, that injury that set him back, I think, as well. You can't really legislate for that. But they're facing adversity, and it's a challenge now. Will they come through it? And if not, I don't think Clement as a coach is going to be giving out any gifts or any presents. So, he's proven if he doesn't feel Chris Gordon is a frontline option for him, he won't play. And that isn't going to change anytime soon, I don't think. So, it's a real challenge. It's a real conundrum. But ultimately, Sargent is the main man, and McCarmer, when played down the centre, has delivered. So I don't think he's got any debate, really, at this moment in time, as frustrated as I'm sure he is.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, Sam, because I remember towards the end, I think it might have actually been in that final press conference that Liam Manning had, and he spoke about Chris Gordon. It was a bit like, if we'd have had this guy available, maybe it would have been somewhat different. So to go from that stage to third choice, and clearly it's still a bit unsure how much this kind of knee issue is impacting things. But yeah, it's been quite a drop-off, hasn't it, from where he was starting games regularly alongside Josh Sargent?
Well, it feels to me like further evidence that they thought Josh Sargent was going to leave in the summer, which is obviously justified because I think we all thought he was going to leave, and obviously there was the Wolfsburg situation, and that looked like it was likely to happen until sort of the late news that he'd turned that move down. So I think the problem is they anticipated that. They probably told him their number 9 is likely to leave the club that very window, and he probably expected to be first choice. Otherwise, I don't see how you could tempt him to Carrow Road ahead of some of the other options that he had. So then it leaves you in a difficult position where you either bench your £7 million summer signing or the striker who scored all your goals in the last 2 or 3 years. And obviously, Clement wants to go with Sargent, and it's kind of interesting because it kind of makes you wonder what the thinking was behind him being a Sargent replacement. And I think he looks like a good player. He's obviously, his technique is good. He seems to be able to kind of hunt goals and get into the right places at the right times to score them. But him and Sargent, I would say, are completely different players. Whereas a McCarmer, you can see more where if they were thinking, who's a long-term replacement for Josh Sargent going into the transfer market, he looks much more like he could do the same types of things that Josh Sargent does in his game. So, in a sense, Chris Gordon almost feels a bit like they just kind of brought him in because they thought he was a great player and they couldn't believe that they were able to afford him or to tempt him to the club.
Which is a bit my problem with the whole of the recruitment in general. It kind of feels like there's too many of those and not enough of the how does this actually look as a squad and as a team and as a championship team trying to win football matches. He's maybe a good case study for that at the moment.
And if you take the other example that Paddy just brought up, Jakov Medic, again.
Well, that I don't understand. I said this in the podcast. I don't really understand.
But again, you look at the profile. He's clearly a defender who probably suits low blocks, headers, tackles. Again, he was playing in the Bundesliga last season, so Clearly, he was signed by Ajax a little bit before that as well. Clearly, he hasn't been performing at the best levels, but he's clearly got the pedigree from earlier on in his career, but he doesn't fit what they're doing. And I'd almost put him and Chris Gorin in that same bracket where was it almost just, this is a good player, the context doesn't matter, bring him in if we can. Medic they got for what you'd say was a reasonably good fee when you look at what other clubs have paid for him, the clubs that he's played for. But again, he doesn't really fit into what they're trying to do. Chris Gorin, again, not remotely similar to Josh Sargent, wasn't really a Liam Manning player, I don't think, and they brought him in, when obviously Manning was the head coach. So it does feel like now, whether these are good players or not, and clearly I would say Chris Gorin is, based on his career prior to joining Norwich, the lack of context around it, the lack of thinking about how they fit in, might be coming back to bite them a little bit at the moment, and that's kind of the only explanation I can offer at the moment, because it is a little bit bewildering how it's gone from that scenario in the summer and then the scenario a few weeks ago to where it is for him now.
There's clearly a good player in there as well. Like we've seen evidence of that. His kind of penalty box instincts, the goals that he scored, some of the finishes. I go back to the first one he scored at Coventry, which was a sublime finish, really. It is a little bit of a conundrum at the moment, that one. So
particularly that you haven't scored a goal in your last 2 home games. There's a guy, look at his goal record in Denmark. Why would you not turn to him earlier in the games? I don't really fathom it.
Agreed. Up for the cup, Paddy?
Yes, I won't be joining you boys in the press area for that one, because I have a 5-year-old who's now mad about Norwich.
Can't play as a winger, can he?
He's more of a goalkeeper, and the way Kovacevic comes for balls in the area, I think he's in with a chance of a start against Walsall. No, he's gone full kit, full home kit was what he got from Santa, and
not Cov then. Is that controversial?
Oh, that's gone. That's gone. That door is closed now, and so to encourage that, we're going to take him to his first ever game at Carrow Road. So don't let me down, Philippe and the boys. Otherwise, you might pivot. I don't know. You might pivot to Kings Lynn or maybe lower down the pecking order. But up for the cup. Yeah, why not? Yeah, let's have a 4th round, nice trip to Everton. We fancy going there, boys, and
Tottenham.
Experience of Tottenham. Now you're talking, yeah. This has got nothing to do with progress. This is more about the media facilities. But funny enough, as I said earlier, touched on that with Philippe, and
what, the media facilities at Tottenham?
No, about the FA Cup. FA Cup, and he was talking. He did actually say, well, it's not beyond the realms that Championship teams get to semi-finals and finals. Coventry, a couple of years ago. I think he then caught himself and said, obviously, I'm not talking about that in terms of that's our ambition. But I think it's safe to say that will be a line-up against Walsall that maybe reflects he does value that competition and does want to progress. So, you watch now, they'll beat Walsall and it'll be, it'll be Watford away or something like that. And they'll get beat and you'll think, why did we bother?
Blackburn or something like that.
Why did we bother? Yeah. But for now, let's get excited about it. I certainly will have a very excitable 5-year-old next week in the South Stand. So, I think you boys must. Do you remember your first ever game of football, iFootball?
Yeah.
I remember, yeah.
So it
lives with you. You never forget it, do you? So it needs to be a good one.
I think there's an actual answer to this, and like the first one I consciously remember, which is very unglamorously. It was in the Peter Grant era, and Norwich got beat 2-0 by Sheffield Wednesday. All I really remember is that the Wednesday fans were quite loud and quite good, and I was sat right next to them. So that obviously made an impression on me. But I remember there was a friendly against, was it Inter Milan at Carrow Road? I've got vague recollections of sitting at the top of
Mine was a friendly.
Maybe the River End.
We played Newcastle in 2010, won 2-1. I remember actually because Tim Krul made an error for the winner, Chris Martin header, and Krul pushed it right in the corner. So, yeah, not the most glamorous game, but I enjoyed it.
But it set you boys off on the path with your green and yellow.
Pain and misery and character building.
Yeah, 5's plenty old enough to be introduced to the pain and misery of following clubs like ours. So the sooner he gets used to it, the better. But no, it's what he wants. I'm not trying to. I certainly didn't force him down the path of Norwich. I can assure you of that. So.
What kit did he go for? Home kit?
Oh yeah, he's gone for the home kit, mate. Yeah. He wanted to be.
That's grown up. I like that.
Yeah, my lad went for the pink one, which he now doesn't wear because it's got a 5 on the back, and he's now turned 6. So he's now too old to wear that shirt, which I did warn him about at the time, I will say. But there we go. Sam, just finally on any other business, you're off. You're leaving us. As if there's anything better to do than this with your time. You've found something, and next week is going to be your last game. So you're going out with a bang.
Yeah, so when you lot were talking about going to all these other grounds and that, I was thinking, I hope not, because if 2 weeks after I leave, you lot are in the new Everton press box for the first time, and I'm missing out on that, then I might be a little bit jealous. But yeah, I'm off, and there's still a week to enjoy, so people can still read my match report or whatever one more time if they're desperate. Although I won't blame them if not. But yeah, not the most glamorous way of going out Walsall at home in the FA Cup, but at least it is at home. I was saying to someone, like, at least it's not. If it was like Blackburn away, and my sign off was arriving home at 1 a.m, then it might not be quite as glamorous. But now I can do like a film scene and look across Carrow Road as the sun sets or whatever. But so yeah, not the most glamorous game, but yeah, I'm looking forward to doing one more game.
Yeah, although the following week is Wrexham away, so not that I'm gonna pick up too much on that. But yeah, I mean, it in many ways, I guess, and you wrote a column about this. I guess it is kind of befitting in many sense that is the game that you go out on. Given, I think it's fair to say, to be fair, us generally, I think I could group myself in with this. Although there was a promotion, but it was behind closed doors, so it was a little bit odd anyway. But it's not been the best few years to follow Norwich City as a fan or in this job or whatever.
No, and there are kind of good things and bad things about it. I think probably, well, the bad things are clear. I would have liked to write more positive articles and see some more happy faces when I was doing the fan reactions and stuff, and ask the managers how great they are rather than asking them whether they're going to get fired. But it's kind of I think part of it also, it's kept me interested, which is, I've got to say, like, I wouldn't have admitted to it a few years ago, but I'm probably more fair weather than I realised. But as you said, I wrote about it in the column. When I go to like Plymouth away and they're in terrible form and they've lost 6-2, and I'm seeing people who have travelled for from 4 a.m. to be there, it gives me a bit of a sense of perspective that maybe I wasn't quite as committed as I thought I was as a fan. But also, like, it gives you a real sense of just how loyal and how committed some of these people are, and how much Norwich City is a big part of their life. So it's been nice in that sense to be able to share a lot of that with people. And obviously I've met a lot of really good people, love working with you lads and our other colleagues, past and present. So yeah, it's been good. And obviously, I think any Norwich fan would realise that you get to do a lot of incredible things that certainly 10 years ago would have absolutely blown my mind. So it's been really good. It would be nice to actually reflect on it and like think about the big, because obviously when you're working, you're just doing your work and you're not really thinking about it so much in those terms. So it'd be nice to look back on it in that sense. But yeah, if anything, for other people it should be good news, because I arrived 2 days after they got relegated. It's been pretty dreadful since then. But now with Philippe Clement in charge, it looks like actually the curse might be wearing off, and especially when I leave, they're just going to rocket up the table. So
well, you look at that schedule. Look at if they go on a 5-match winning run after you go, then we know. We'll part the grand farewell, because obviously we've got a week to go and a pod post Walsall to reflect fully on it. But for people who maybe hadn't seen on social media and stuff, this is a good way to kind of say it for Sam as well. That is a nice place to wrap up the pod. Thank you so much as ever for watching and for listening. I was going to end this with something triumphant about 2026 being a better year for all involved, but after today, I think it's just about waking up tomorrow and going again. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you soon.